Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 10. We start out with Zelda rushing into Sabrina's room in a panic because Sabrina and Chloe were stereotypically squealing in delight. Because the radio just announced that their favorite group is going to be shooting their next rock video in Greendale, conveniently. And they're going to select one local girl to be a featured dancer, and auditions are next week. Unless one of them cheat, it sure would be convenient in conventional fiction if one of them was selected, out of all of the other contestants who might be more qualified, just because they're main characters. It's kind of believable, because coincidences do happen. Chloe says she's gonna run home and make sure it's okay if she tries out. Sabrina says sorry when Zelda says that Sabrina's gonna make sure it's okay with her. How controlling is she? Sabrina says that she assumed it'd be cool with her needlessly overprotective and controlling aunt, who hopes this band isn't a bunch of metalheads, because she's a very small person who has no idea what an actual problem is, has never given a metal song a chance in her life, and clearly has no idea who Sabrina is if she thought a stereotypical teenage girl would give metal a chance for a second. Of course they're a boy band that's singing about stereotypical things, because if she turned out to be lying to Zelda, that'd be interesting, and have even the most obvious amount of creativity and guts without really mattering to the plot. Zelda tells Sabrina not to use any magic at all for the contest, and if she wins, it can't interfere with her upcoming schoolwork. It is responsible of her to tell her this, because otherwise it wouldn't be fair to the other contestants. But I still want to see a bunch of spells, because this is a comic about witches. If she's not going to use magic, I don't want to see the story. This would be made up for if we still saw a bunch of magic, even if it wasn't magic to cheat at auditions. A week later, Sabrina and Hilda lie to Sabrina that they'd love to see her dance routine for today's audition, when really they don't want to hear that song again, and hate Salem yelling through the megaphone to be quiet on the set. These aunts don't even make sense. They constantly flip-flop between being too strict, their only impression because we remember negative things better, and being ridiculously lenient. If these people are such overprotective, strict aunts, they would just be honest with Sabrina up front. Why is the text from Salem in the boombox in lowercase and uppercase? Well, it was nice of her aunts to genuinely like Sabrina's dancing and cheer her on. It turns out the dance auditions are at the high school auditorium, and they're calling Gem now. I'd rather see a new character that sucks and gets thrown away after one story than have to see an old character I despise multiple times. Of course Gem would audition, but why does she have to be in the same panel as Sabrina? She could have been at the front of the line. Well, they'd have shown up a lot later. Sabrina says that she's not nervous, somehow, even though everyone knows that Chloe's the best dancer around, all of a sudden. But she's gonna give it her best shot. It sure is impressive that Chloe's the best dancer around, suddenly. At least this develops on her character more. It's not really accomplishing its goal of making her stand out, because Sabrina can dance too. And why is she the best dancer around? It just screams main character syndrome. There's so many other teenagers in that high school, so it's way more likely that Chloe wouldn't be the best dancer around. Good thing for her that her family's got enough money to give her the best possible dance lessons and for the longest amount of time, so she'd be the most experienced. Wouldn't Gem be the best dancer? Her parents would pay for the best dance lessons to keep her out of their way a lot. After Gem's audition, a minute later Sabrina steps on stage, and Gem says that she thinks there's been a mistake. I'm glad she's told that she was excused, and so she's not allowed to come back here. She says that this bag of money that she showed her is only a down payment, and there's lots more where that came from. I'm so glad that reality ensued, and she was thrown out. She's told, this is supposed to be a talent contest. So what was that about Gem being allowed to get away with anything? I'm glad that rule established in the beach story was contradicted. A character as unlikable as Gem can only be any kind of sympathetic if she always loses, like Elmira. Sabrina asks Chloe what happened, since she was in there a long time, and she says she's gonna tell her later. They're told to come inside since the director has made a choice. Zelda told Sabrina that if she won, it wouldn't be allowed to interfere with her schoolwork, meaning that her winning shouldn't change the status quo anyways. But since I kinda hate Sabrina in this comic, and it just said that her winning the auction would be too fiction-y, I'm satisfied with Chloe winning instead of Sabrina, because it's slightly less predictable. She doesn't pay attention enough and trips when she tries to get on stage, and sprains her ankle right away. Now I wish Gem won so she'd sprain her ankle. Chloe's reminded that she gets to pick her alternate in case she doesn't dance, so surprisingly, she gives Jem the role. Then we cut to later, where Sabrina is refusing to answer the phone when Chloe's been trying to call her for hours. And I guess since she never wants to speak to her again, she couldn't just go to her house and explain things either. I guess Sabrina ran away from Chloe and didn't let her explain her decision. But if they were really such good friends, she would have let her explain right there. Wouldn't she be really curious about why she'd make such a bizarre decision and want to know immediately? These are the same people who hugged after fighting over concert tickets. Salem says that Chloe's been standing at the window since this morning on her cell phone. Why doesn't this idiotic cat talk to Chloe himself? He would have warped to her and gotten the answer out of her right away. He uses magic to reunite them. And Chloe says that she wanted to tell her about her audition later, and now it's later. So, an entire scene where Sabrina was mad at her was based on her poor communication skills. While she aced her audition, while she was drinking from a water fountain, she heard the boy band arriving through the back door, and a dream turned into a nightmare when she heard them insult her. One of them said that letting a band dance in the video would be a lame idea, and they all bicker with each other. When the director showed up, they all started screaming at each other, and the only thing they cared about was money. So she turned on them, and she just faked the sprained ankle, which feels like much better writing. She decided that Jem and those stuck-up rock stars deserved each other. Sabrina cries and apologizes for jumping to conclusions, thankfully. I mean, this is a girl who keeps a secret that you're a witch. How did you not trust her for even a second? What an idiot plot. I'm guessing Chloe didn't have the time to tell her, and had to say that she'd tell her later. They hug after talking out, which should have happened much earlier. And Salem interests them when he tells them that their band broke up. Chloe says that at least their friendship's not a fad. This is why the 90s comic shouldn't have pretended the series took place in the younger days of Sabrina's life. Because what happened to Chloe then? In the comedy page, a woman named Mrs. Kinkle happily tells Sabrina to come on in and tells her that Harvey Kinkle's upstairs. And Sabrina tells Harvey that the movie starts in 20 minutes, and it turns out she's talking to a pile of laundry. The joke is supposed to be that her making that mistake was understandable because he's wearing a baggy shirt and pants, but he never dresses like that. He's only written to do it so they can make a comedy page about it. So that's not a clever joke, it's just cheating. And it didn't have any magic in it, so it wasn't valuable as an insight into Sabrina's life, like most comedy pages. In the next story, Hilda tells Sabrina to answer the door because she just left the shower and it was too stupid to just use magic to dry her hair instantly. It's impossible to relate to a witch that stupid. Anyone would use magic to dry their dripping wet hair if they could. Oh, now there's a zap. A guy holding an umbrella tips his hat and asks her if he can help her and if her parents are home. Hilda's already ready to answer the door a couple seconds later. Because he smoothly says that she must be her older sister, she wants him to go on, and he says that he runs an antique store over in the next state and this is his day off. He coughs because of allergies and says that he takes trips to visit new areas and seek out old neighborhoods. He agrees to be given a glass of tea or water and thanks her, and says that they have a wonderful old mansion full of vintage furnishings, none of which are for sale. I assume it will be eventually, or else how do they make their money? And in a panel where a character is complimenting his surroundings, it was really inexcusable for the artist to not draw his surroundings. And if Sabrina lives in a mansion, that means she's rich too. But it's always Jem who's portrayed as rich for some reason, because she's allowed to do what she wants with her money, when Sabrina's family would have just as bottomless pockets. He says that this house is a treasure trove of antiques, like the spooky jar, for example. I hope the story goes on to explain the spooky jar, or it'll be a completely wasted opportunity. We cut to him thanking them again for the tea in his trunk. Sabrina panics, saying to look in the kitchen, which immediately gives away that he stole the spooky jar, and slips it under his hat. Why does Hilda think he's no antique dealer just because of this? He's even in a truck that says antiques on it. Hilda's calm about it though, and tells Sabrina that Spooky will be back just fine. Suddenly it turns out that he wasn't really an antique dealer and it was just a scam, even though an antique dealer would be even more motivated to try to steal antiques, because he could sell them at his shop. Instead, he conveniently has a black market content. His hat hits the top of the jar when he takes it off for no reason. That won't happen. There was no obligation for him to take his hat off while still in the car. He likes the hat enough to wear it most of the time. Spooky could have easily been written to take revenge on him in his house. which I assumed would be how it would go. It sure is inconvenient for him that he says out loud that he stole a truckload of antiques from old ladies when he already knows that himself. Spooky thinks he needs to be punished, and because bullshit, there's a voice in his head from Sabrina telling him no violence this time, and I'm forced to just assume that Sabrina's speaking to him telepathically, because he doesn't interact with Sabrina nearly enough for her to have become his conscience. So he decides to impersonate his own conscience and play with his head, but he's doing this while he's driving. Somehow, instead of him freaking out about the fact that he's hallucinating and stopping the car, or trying to drive to a mental hospital, he decides to grab him and throw him out of the truck, and somehow he just casually tells him to scram instead of freaking out about the fact that he's clearly physically interacted with a small supernatural creature. As far as he knows, he's thrown a little angel out of the car. If this was actually going logically, he would have been so distracted freaking out at Spooky that he'd crashed his car into something. The plot would have ended a lot faster than this. Him having this kind of casual reaction where he throws him out couldn't even make sense if he was a witch, or otherwise already familiar with supernatural creatures, because if he was, he'd know that he's completely screwed against him and listen to him, or he'd freeze him in time if he is a witch. Is he used to hallucinations that he can actually grab and throw? So Spooky picks up his truck to make him scream, and the story ends with him returning the Spooky jar while his hair has been turned white by magic. And Sabrina actually comments on that. So it's really a thing that happened and not a dumb artistic choice, the likes of which never happened in the real Sabrina comics. He says he has to return all his stolen stuff to satisfy his conscience. Hopefully this will lead to him being an obsessively good person from now on out of fear of Spooky, so this was worth it. But it makes me wonder why witches don't do this a lot more often if it can have such an idealistic result. If witches were really serious about no magic being used in any kind of shady way on Earth, and that's why this isn't commonly done, then you'd think the Witches' Council would cast a spell so that any witches living there would have no powers. That'd be a much more effective way to hide the existence of magic than hiring tons of surveillance camera watchers and erasing memories all the time. But to be fair, witches are more subtle about magic in this comic so far. The next story starts out with Hilda telling Sabrina to be good for Quigley while they're upstate visiting Aunt Edna. I hope he isn't good for him, and gets humiliated. It was nice of Sabrina to hug Salem. Salem says he wants some naps and meals, and I don't care what he did in the past. It was still irritating that Quigley immediately struck that down and told him to slave away in the greenhouse. He's not gonna pay Salem, so it's slavery. He says he needs help cleaning up. Why does he need help? Is he too lazy to do it himself? I can imagine he has nothing else to do. It's not like he has a job, which would have tried to make him respectable, and failed because the series didn't need him earlier. Isn't it obvious I'd be more interested in seeing Aunt Edna and what her character is, instead of Quigley? He shows Salem a new species of flowery crossbred, and he's timed the bloom to open at the next week's flower show. I guess the reason Salem won't warp away is that he's scared of Zelda's punishment if he does. But he could rewrite Quigley's memory too. Salem questions all his efforts, and because Quigley starts using big words, Salem takes a nap right in front of him. It'd be smarter if he just warped away from him so that he wouldn't be woken up. Miraculously, Quigley was feeling merciful enough not to wake him up right away, so we cut to hours later where it's revealed that he did all the work. Either that or this is a dream of Salem's. Salem asks him if he wants him to zap the orchid so it blooms now. Quigley says no, but not because he already told him that he only wants it to bloom at a specific time. Instead he calls it black magic because he's racist against witches. Imagine if Archie Bunker lived with his neighbors for an entire comic. This guy's a horrible main character because we as the audience have been trained to want magic. It's not doing something wrong, so how is it black magic? How could you think making a flower bloom is black magic? Salem says he already had a bowl of leftover tuna casserole for lunch and he wants to go for a stroll. Then I'm expected to believe that his collar slipped off while he was sleeping. So is this proof that it's a dream? It's strapped around his neck. How can it just slip off? He goes back into the greenhouse and he doesn't know where the light switch is. And he trips and breaks stuff while he's looking for it, as the artist makes the baffling decision of not showing any of what's happening in the greenhouse, destroying any kind of comedy the slapstick could have had. He had no reason to not just use magic to turn on the lights, because Quigley wasn't there. He wants to use magic because Quigley's flower was ruined. And somehow he takes more than one panel to decide to use magic to fix things. Now since he's actually planning on using magic, I'm guessing it'll somehow backfire in a contrived bullshit way to spite Salem. He should have just used magic to zap a new collar onto himself. So if the moral of the story is supposed to be that using magic is always bad, then guess what? He didn't use magic enough! He would have avoided this entire plot. He wishes he'd paid better attention in biology class as he uses magic to zap up a fixed version of the orchid he saw earlier. There's no reason whatsoever that this would backfire on him because he saw it, so he knows what to imagine. Can witches still reverse time in the animated series? I'm guessing it's gonna somehow grow gigantic, and maybe act like a Venus flytrap. But that's complete bullshit as a plot development, because he had no reason to think of the orchid as being dangerous or anything. Plots like this just makes the writer look jealous of the witches. Because if it's contrived that the spell backfires, if there's no logical reason, it makes you wonder what the meta reason is for why the writer really wanted that to happen, as opposed to writing anything else. I guess the writer just somehow thought the result would be entertaining, and so it was totally worth writing it. Quigley says that's hard for light to penetrate a thick orchid jungle. This story sucks. This better just be a dream of his. He says that a huge taproot extends from the greenhouse to the back door, and Salem says that, obviously, I mixed too many spells. How is that obvious? That's insane! He tells him he'll zap it away, and the anti-witch racist says no. He refuses to let him get the chainsaw as well. This guy only deserves to be called the anti-witch racist. He smiles like a nice guy, but he just hates witches. And being related to Sabrina doesn't make up for it. He's not their best friend, he's not married to one of them, like the few mortals who know about magic in Wizards of Waverly Place, so he has no business being here. He says there's no sense disposing of it without clipping and planting all those healthy blooms. And Salem says it would take someone days to cut and pot all of them. And he tells him to do it. There's no indication he's paying him. He's opposed to using magic to do good, but he's fine with slavery. He calls good magic black magic when any fantasy game player would correct him on this, and yet he thinks it's perfectly fine to still take advantage of what magic gives him. That's why he's smart enough to get all the blooms planted, but they're blooms that came from magic. You'd think he would want it all zapped away. It'd actually be better if this bullshit was all just a dream. This issue was by Mike Gallagher. The first story was a surprisingly well-written plot, actually, despite being a bit too slow-paced. Where after training to be a dancer in a music video, it's all for nothing on Sabrina's part. And she gets mad at Chloe when she nominates Jem to be her replacement when she sprains her ankle right away. But fortunately it's explained that she turned on the band for hating their fans and each other. So she thought Jem deserved to be stuck with them, and the plot was padded out by Sabrina not wanting to know why she picked Jem right away out of curiosity, and instead ignoring her for hours, even though she can be trusted with her secret. The plot could have started a lot later on, like right when they were about to audition, and we would have missed nothing and had plenty of comic space left for the other stories. If this was Sonic the Comic, it would have started out with them right at the auditorium. The second story is about someone posing as an antique dealer stealing the spooky jar for money, just to get scared into giving it back. That was just one sentence, so why did the story have to last as long as it did? He would have crashed the car when Spooky talked to him in disguise, not simply thrown him out without being afraid of him. The final story is some contrived nonsense where, after getting my hopes up that we'll get to meet Aunt Edna, instead of showing a new witch character, the story's about Salem somehow breaking Quigley's flower in the dark because he didn't just zap up a new collar after he somehow lost it in his nap, and because he didn't cast that spell, he somehow screws up a spell that has no reason to do anything but fix the flower he broke. So he gets forced to pot all of the new blooms without pay, being punished for an accident that was no fault of his own when all he was trying to do was help someone. That's stupid. What I would have done if I couldn't find a light switch in a place is go to Quigley and ask him to find the light switch, if not use magic to turn the lights on, since he's more experienced with the greenhouse's layout. Using magic would have avoided the entire plot, so it's just an idiot plot that was needlessly cruel to Salem. Now at least write him to be really insulting to someone first before mistreating the character.